Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about why you should collect physical media and why now is probably the best time in history to start a physical media collection. So let's start off with why you would collect. Collecting obviously isn't for everyone. Obviously it costs a lot to house all this. I mean, you're paying rent, you'd have to get a bigger place, or maybe you store it under the TV or something. Maybe there is room. But to house something like my collection, obviously it takes an entire room. So there is considerations with that. Space is obviously an issue. We are in a cost of living crisis and a rental crisis at the moment. So you really need to consider your circumstances before you start collecting. But if you make that decision and start collecting, nothing beats physical media. In terms of quality, like if I pull out Scream, this will probably be a higher bit rate than what you'd get on streaming. 4K is always going to be looking better. Even Blu-ray has a higher bit rate. But I actually think this is probably the definitive way to experience movies. 4K, that is. There are some circumstances where DNR has been done to a movie and has, in essence, ruined a lot of movies, such as Terminator 2. But then another thing with physical media is that you can pick and choose what version of the movie you want to watch. So if you don't like the new transfer of Terminator 2, buy an older Blu-ray copy, and the Blu-ray copy will be just as good and usually better than streaming anyway. So you're still getting the best of both worlds, where you can pick and choose the version you want to watch. Now, if you were fully digital, you would be stuck with the latest version that the studio pushes on and says, we want this to be the version everyone buys. You'd be stuck with that version if you were not physical. Now, obviously I pull up Scream. Why did I choose this one? Well, one thing with this version of 4K is that this isn't the definitive director's cut. I mean, it will say it has a director's cut on it, I'm sure, but it is not the proper director's cut. The director's cut of Scream was only ever released on Laserdisc, and it has not been released since. It hasn't been released on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K. It is unique to the Laserdisc copy. I have a copy of the Laserdiscs, and it is a more gory version. There are scenes extended out. It is definitely it was Wes Craven's preferred version, but that is not seen on the 4K. So when I talk about picking and choosing your experience, yes, I have the 4K because it looks beautiful on 4K. Don't get me wrong, but I also like to own the director's cut that was only released on Laserdisc. And not everyone has a Laserdisc player, I get that. It's not for everyone. But what I'm talking about is you can pick and choose your experience. And I think that's very important. Another thing you can also do is if a movie no longer fits a studio's agenda or fits a studio's rep, is it reputation or fits their code or whatever, then you can still own the movie. Like Gone with the Wind, there was a big controversy about the erasing of this movie from the Disney catalogue. Same thing with Song of the South. I mean, obviously it has some racial undertones. This one definitely has a lot of content that would not be seen in modern settings, would be a bit more confrontational. But the movie was made in the 1940s, and I find that watching movies can start a discussion topic. Obviously, we don't want to repeat the past, but this has a right to exist. I mean, look, it's a product of its time. I'll admit that. It's a product of its time. It's not my favourite movie. It's definitely not in my top 10, but this grossed a lot of... This was one of the highest grossing movies for like 80 odd years, until Titanic came along, and I don't think anything ever sold more tickets than this and Titanic. Like, this is probably still the record holder for most tickets sold over the span of how many times it got re-released, its original theatrical run. I think this is still considered to be the highest grossing movie of all time, adjusted from inflation. But something like this doesn't fit Disney's current standing on where they sit with everything. So obviously it has some racial undertones. There are depictions of slavery in this movie. And obviously Disney have decided, in large part, to not include this on Disney Plus, or moving forward to further promote the movie. Does it have a right to exist? I believe so. Look, you can't judge with modern in the modern setting. I mean, obviously it was a product of its time, as I said, but it's a discussion topic now. Obviously, if I watch this with someone like a family member who's a bit younger or anything, we'll watch this and we'll say, okay, what do you feel walking away from that movie? What do you what do you like about the movie? What do you not like about the movie? Obviously, the confrontational parts of the movie. How do you feel about those? So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why physical media is important. To preserve, at least, preservation is another large part of collecting. Now, in the past couple of days, I've seen something break out about 28 Days Later not being on streaming, which is one of the most important movies. I mean, is it Killian? Yeah, it's Killian Murphy, one of his early movies. I haven't watched this in a minute, don't judge me. But this is one of the best movies. I mean, when he's going through, I don't want to really spoil it, but you have turn off for a moment if you haven't seen this movie. But when he's going through that army camp, and yeah, Gillian is on fire in this movie. This is one of his best. And with the resurgence of Killian with Oppenheimer, I feel like movies like this are going to get a lot more notoriety. And not, it's already notable. Obviously, it had a sequel. It's a really good movie, but obviously, with Killian being so in the public eye with the Oscars and everything, and Oppenheimer, then yeah, I feel a lot of people will go back and look at movies like this, and look at movies like another underrated one of Killian is Sunshine. That's a really underrated movie. So yeah, there's a lot of movies out there that may not be on digital. I mean, True Lies and The Abyss were not on digital for many years, and it's only recently that they've showed up on Disney Plus and are getting a physical media release. Now, what's to say? I mean, it's a Cameron movie, so I don't think that is in any danger of being erased. But what happens if Jim Cameron says, you know what, this version no longer fits what I want? I want to take it down from Disney Plus or streaming. Theoretically, Cameron would be, in a way, justified in doing that because it's his movie, obviously. I mean, obviously, he's got to answer to Fox and what was Fox, now 20th Century Studios under Disney. He would have to answer to them, obviously, but I mean, he's the big money maker at the moment. He's the highest grossing director ever of all time. And studios are going to keep people like Jim Cameron happy. Now, obviously, what happened to Terminator 2, for example, we all remember what happened. I mean, the colours were changed, those beautiful California sunsets that they took ages to get, and during the production of the movie, they talked about in director's commentaries, trying to get that one California sunset, that one shot that just beautifully encapsulates the movie. He changed that with a colour grade. Now, do I agree with the colour grade? Definitely, he's the director of the movie. He can, obviously, it's his child. He can do whatever he wants with it, essentially. But when it's in the public, once it's in the public eye and has been presented to the public, I have a bit of a problem with directors going back and just changing things that the public has fallen in love with in that movie. So it is dangerous to allow directors to have unchecked control over their movies. Look what happened with Star Wars. I mean, there is still a huge debate. I'm on the theatrical version of that. I prefer the original pre-1997 versions. But there is a huge debate about whether those are obsolete and the 1997 onwards is the definitive Star Wars. Because Lucas had said for years, that's the version we're going with. And theatrical has not been put out other than 2006, a Laserdisc transfer to DVD. Now I have the Laserdiscs, obviously, but I've also got the 2006 limited editions that have the disc in it. I also buy these ones. Like, I buy the current versions because, you know, if I wanted to download despecialized or something, not that I'm saying you should, then I am supporting the official release before I do that. And yes, I'm trying to say to Disney as well that the theatrical version should always be available, but if it's not available, I have to find means to watch it as I can. And obviously, I will obviously go for my DVD versions if possible because they're physical media. I've got them. I own them. I can pop it in a player and be completely switched off from the internet. But what if I decide, you know what, I want a high quality version of this, and I don't want to watch these versions? Well, I'm out of luck. I got no option but to hoist the Jolly Roger, as they say. And I think that's a problem. I mean, for many years, something like the Warriors, legendary Walter Hill movie, had this director's cut in Australia, and yes, it was on DVD. But when it's made its way to Blu-ray, and this was within Australia, the director's cut was the only version you could get in Australia. You could not get the theatrical as it was seen, and it was a problem. I obviously stuck with the DVD version for longer because that's the version I liked. And when cartoon scenes were put into the movie, and that long walk away on the beach, that final shot, was replaced essentially with cartoon or a cartoon comic style, it kind of ruined the end of the movie for me. Now, some people prefer that version, I'm sure, but what I'm saying is that the theatrical version should always be preserved, and to have it in your collection means that they can't just take it off you. If a streaming service like Wile E. Coyote versus Acme, whatever it is, um, a movie like that was essentially ready to go in the can, ready to go, ready to be released, and Warner Brothers decided, you know what, we're just going to do a tax write-off. We don't even care about this movie. David Zaslav basically didn't even look at the movie and just said, "No, we're done. That's a tax write-off." That movie has a right to exist. People worked on that movie. People put time and effort into that movie. The special effects were essentially done. The score, everything was done with that movie. For Warner Brothers to just erase it, what does that say about where we are as a society? I mean, a lot of people still want that movie to be released. I definitely do. I want to see it. I mean, it's the Looney Tunes essentially. It's like, and it's one of my favorite Looney Tunes that I grew up with, Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. I mean, who doesn't want to see that? But obviously, Warner Brothers have said, no, we don't want to put that out. Same thing with Batgirl. People put effort into that, and I'm sure that movie would have probably sucked. Doesn't have any less of a right to exist. Just because a movie is going to be bad doesn't mean that it has less of a right to exist. I mean, for example, The Room, for all of the things that they did with that movie, in the production and why it looks the way it does, the out of sync audio, it's brought on a cult status, you know? And I don't think Batgirl was going to become a cult status. But hey, it may have been so bad that it was good, you know? It deserves that chance to live, you know? Especially when a team of people, hundreds and hundreds of people have worked on that movie. I believe it has a right to exist. And I don't agree with erasing movies from catalogues just as a tax cut. Now, another thing that I haven't mentioned, and why to collect physical media, I know we went off on a bit of a rant just then, but another reason to collect physical media is you can essentially switch offline, and let's say the internet goes down, as long as you have power at your place, and if the internet's not going to come back forever, you can still watch movies. Like, so many times I've turned my phone off, my internet off, and essentially just completely switched off to the world. I can still watch my movies. I don't have to be connected to the internet. And I can watch them in the highest quality possible, whether it's Blu-ray, even DVDs. Some DVDs offer a higher bit rate than what some streaming services do. Like, if you're watching through third-party streaming services, not the direct studio ones, but like a 7 Plus, like a SBS On Demand, like a ABC iView or anything. If you're watching through those services, I'm sure they offer a HD option, but what are you actually getting? And with a DVD, I know I'm getting the... Look, DVD gets a bad rap in this day and age, but wrestling, for example, I still, until WWE stopped it at last year, I was still collecting the wrestling releases, the WWE ones. And the reason for that is that if WWE decide, oh, you know what, this pay-per-view no longer fits our agenda because of this reason, or hey, we got Brock on the cover of this one, and obviously he's not being erased, but essentially being not promoted anymore for what's being said about him with the allegations. Same thing with Vince McMahon. What happens if they turn around and say, oh, the Attitude Era, the whole Austin era, obviously it would erase Stone Cold's legacy as well, but what if they turn around and say, oh, we can no longer show Vince McMahon? Obviously, I don't agree with what Vince McMahon did, but if I want to go back and experience that era with currently knowing what I know about what's been promoted and what's been said in the media and the lawsuit, then I deserve the right to go back and look at those releases. I just don't like the idea that we can no longer control our own destiny and choose for ourselves. And that is another reason. So I will collect physical media because I like to preserve it as it was seen and as it was intended. Now, obviously, something like Australian releases, I've got an Australian section over here. Something like the Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, I've said this in the previous video, where would you see that get a release? I mean, Stan, obviously in Australia, you get this with Stan. I'm sure, I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure this would be on Stan. This screams Stan, a title that will be on Stan. But what happens if you go outside of Australia? Where would you watch the Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith? Is it iTunes? I mean, Apple's backing away from iTunes at the moment. Like, essentially, I think they've mentioned they've shut it down in terms of Apple TV. But it's still... If I want to watch that movie, I shouldn't have to go looking for it. It should just be as easy as saying to my TV, okay, or where can I find this movie, or just Google it. Okay, it's on Blah streaming service. I shouldn't have to go searching for it, and I think that's a problem. Whereas it's right on my shelf over here. I just go, bang, here we go. We're watching Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith Knife. Put it in my player, ready to go. You know, thinking about it, I know where it's housed because I categorize all this in a way. That's another thing. I'll do another video about how I arrange my collection. But I think that it's important to know, have peace of mind that when you want to watch a movie, it's there. You don't have to go looking, you don't have to go paying. It does cost more up front though. And I will say, I'll do another video eventually about the cost of something like a Blu-ray collection. But to say that, look, if I decided to get all streaming cut off and whatever, I can just live off this for the next 10 odd years. Like, I have no shortage of movies to watch. And yes, it is a bigger upfront cost, but I'm not controlled by a streaming service. And that's another thing with the algorithm. That's another reason to go physical. The algorithm will mention, oh, we think you will like this movie because you've watched this movie. It's essentially putting a movie in front of you that it's trying to recommend and push on to people because you watched that movie, you liked it, and it thinks, okay, here's a recommendation. It kind of ruins the discovery aspect of it. Back in the video days, we had aisles and aisles that you could just go through and be like, oh, I like the cover of this. Like, what's a really enticing cover? Like, Electra is a really good cover. That's not the proper poster. Obviously, it's got a bit of a smudge up there. But you know, if I saw this on a shelf, obviously, you know, Jennifer Gardner is like, come on. I've got a big poster from the video shop days. Like, when I eventually do buy my own house, I'm going to put it up. It's like a man cave sort of poster. But I mean, look, it's not a bad movie. I mean, it definitely gets a bad rap because it was so closely tied to Daredevil, and I think Daredevil was a bit worse. But watching these movies back, like, you can enjoy these as standalones. Like, this is definitely a good movie. Like, it's not bad. It's just that under the banner of Marvel and trying to put it in the comic book aspect, when you're watching it as like, oh, this is in no way accurate to the comics and trying to go off that. If you watch it as a standalone, it's enjoyable. Look. And I don't want to get into the comic book phase and like, what did they do? What did they do? Because then I'd go off on The Walking Dead and be like, oh, you know, The Walking Dead still has 14 different spin-offs or whatever, and none of it is comic accurate, even though they try to say it's comic accurate. I mean, they got pretty comic accurate with All Out War and the Negan stuff. They got pretty close with that, due in part Jeffrey Dean Morgan was just that good. But you know, that show made a lot of calls based on shock value, and really they really should have kept a lot of characters alive that they killed off early on in the show. Andrea is obviously one of them. Obviously, Rick ends up in the comics with Andrea rather than Michonne. But Michonne was a really good character, a really good person to put Rick with. I think that really helped overall. And, you know, her name... Oh, I forget her name. Everyone knows who I'm talking about, Michonne. I forget her name. Sorry about that. I completely forgot about her name at the moment. We all have that temporary brain fart. It'll come back to me and I'll stop doing this video and be like, oh, that's right. But, yeah. What I'm talking about is that she's a supremely better actor than who was playing Andrea. And the one who played Andrea was really great as well. I loved her acting roles as well. but it's night and day. But that's not comic accurate. The Walking Dead isn't comic accurate. It hasn't been comic accurate for many years. But I still enjoyed the show until they essentially got rid of Rick on that show. I gave up after season 9.5, whatever. It was like whenever Rick left that show. I know they've brought him back now with his own show with Michonne. I might check that out, but I'm not in any desperate. I'm not desperate to go and run out and watch The Walking Dead where it's at now. I might check it out eventually when they finish the whole thing and it's all a contained package that I can just go, okay, I finished halfway through season 9. I'll just watch from there on and watch the rest, complete the series. But it's just too much to watch now. It's like Daryl has his own spin-off, and then Negan and Maggie have their own spin-offs, and then Rick and Michonne have their own spin-offs, and it's just like, it's just too much. And until it's all done, I'm probably just not going to even bother, because it's too much to watch. I don't have enough time. It's the same thing with what I did with The Boys. The Boys I actually like, and they've come out with this Gen V? They're kind of in between season 3 and 4, or what is it? Season 3 and 4, what they've just released before this new season. I'm kind of hesitant to watch that show. It's like, yeah, I know it's there. I'm sure it's a really good show, and I'm sure I probably should check it out before season 4 drops. But I just don't have the time. Like, I don't really want to commit to a new show and then have to watch season 2 of that while The Boys are in between season 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, and I just want to watch The Boys. I don't want to have to watch a spin-off. And that's where I think something like Yellowstone have prevailed. Like, when they do their spin-offs, they make it in a completely different era that you can watch alone. It's a standalone. And I know this wasn't the topic of the video. The topic of the video is why you should actually collect physical media. So we'll come back to the topic because I was going off on a rant. So yeah, owning physical media is just a safeguard, and I think if you love media, then you get to tailor your own experience. Like, if you don't like Terminator 2, the new version, buy an older Blu-ray. Buy the older version of it. That version was definitive for 10 odd years. And if that version doesn't work for you, go back to DVD. DVD had a good release. And if that doesn't work for you, go back to Laserdisc. Go back to VHS. Like, you can tailor the experience to your tastes. There are a lot of people who will... Oh, do I have it on the shelf here? I have it on the shelf here. 1 second. Let's grab it out without knocking over old Fred here. I don't want to knock over old Freddy. I've got a Freddy Krueger statue right to my side. But something like A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this is obviously a re-release. Obviously, the cover is different with the older ones. But for me, A Nightmare on Elm Street, like just to own A Nightmare on Elm Street on VHS, I feel like this is the definitive way to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, obviously the lower resolution of VHS makes it a bit more gritty, a bit more, like, yeah, you can still make out the action, don't get me wrong, like, but the higher quality doesn't actually help a horror movie like that. I think the grittiness and the grain and, like, the blurriness a bit kind of help that movie and make it more scary. But obviously, not everyone feels the same. Obviously, I've also got the Blu-ray copies somewhere on my shelf here. But I just like to have and tailor my experience to my tastes. And that's why I have the VHS copy of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Because this is also a definitive version in my view. Like, horror fans will tell you all the stories about why they went back, and like something like The Evil Dead, for example, is cult status on VHS. But you can tailor it to your experience and tailor it to your taste, tailor it to what your preference is, how you want to experience that movie, or maybe your nostalgia. Maybe you want to tailor it to your nostalgia. Either way, you are in full control with physical media, not the studios. With streaming and digital, the studios have full control to say, you know what, we don't think you're allowed, we don't want you to have this version of A Nightmare on Elm Street. We think that this is no good. We don't want you to have this. We want you to have the 4K restoration with color grades and blah blah blah. They haven't done a 4K restoration of Nightmare on Elm Street. I am waiting for it though. But let's say they did that and said, okay, we don't want you to have that. We're erasing all previous versions. We're gonna replace Freddy Krueger with Five Nights at Freddy's or whatever. That would be hilarious, by the way. But let's say they said that and said, oh, we're erasing everything. Well, I want to watch the version I grew up with. I want to watch the version I'm nostalgic for. Physical media. I don't have to worry about what studios are doing. I just go and get it off my shelf. And that's why I love physical media, because I am in full control. And if you feel the same, drop a like and a comment. Till next time, peace.